Welcome back to Television is Furniture. Today we are incredibly honoured and a bit spun out to have with us a satirist, comedian, actor and all-round Australian legend of the stage and screen, Max Gillies somehow. Max, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I'll start off by doing the commercial thing first by saying, Max, you're in mono at the moment, which has it still got its Melbourne season, or did you only have a couple of nights?
Two more performances in Frankston tomorrow, and then we're out of Melbourne. We've done two already in Melbourne Central, and then Frankston.
Yep.
And out.
And then, how big is the tour? You're going from
and then we go from here to Tasmania to Hobart. Couple of shows there, and then up to Queensland and southwest Queensland, but getting up as far as Cairns. I think Cairns is where we finish. It's been a 6-week tour, which takes its toll on three old codgers because you haven't explained exactly who's in the show, but we're not spring chickens, and as I say, it takes its toll. We do 2 shows a day in a venue, then we're up sticks, travel for a day, new digs, and 2 more performances in the next venue, and the same thing 3 times a week. So we're seeing a good bit of the country one way or another.
Yeah, I bet. Yes, I was just about to mention the others who join you in the cast. It's a show of monologues, 9 monologues split up between a lineup of Australian performing arts luminaries, your good self, of course, Noelene Brown and John Wood. Is John Wood the baby of the cast, by the way?
He is, actually, yeah. And that's how I've always thought of him. We shared digs, a flat, when we were, before he went off to NIDA to become a professional actor, and before I'd given up my day job to have a go at making a living out of it. So we go back a long way.
Yeah, that's before going to NIDA. So okay, so I'm going to guess if you're still making a decision as to when to get started, that's the early Pram. That's the mid 70s.
It's a bit earlier than the Pram, actually. It's in the 1960s, which I dimly remember as a decade for theatre people in Melbourne on the fringes, and would be taking centre stage if we could work out how to get there. While that decade was on, there were many attempts to get an alternative theatre company to the Melbourne Theatre Company, which in Melbourne in those days was already in the early 60s, although it had only been less than a decade old. It was already regarded by the rest of us as the stodgy, conservative, old-fashioned theatre. There's a lot of hyperbole in that, and it wasn't, of course, true at any stage, but that's how we thought of it. And we were juggling for most of the 60s different ideas for new theatre companies. Little companies came and went and so on, and it wasn't until the Pram Factory, which really gets going in 1970, that there's a decade of the alternative theatre company in Melbourne, as I like to think of it. Anyway, long roundabout way.
No, that's to someone like me. That stuff's fascinating, and in fact, I'm going to ask more. So the story of alternative theatre in Australia does get, or in Melbourne at least, does get a bit swamped by the memory of the Pram factory. I'm fascinated by that period beforehand. Do you are there any small companies or projects that you remember from back then that?
Well, this it shouldn't be. My memory shouldn't be taken as the be all and end all. I'm sure it was going on all over the place. The ones that I was aware of, either as party to or friends of parties to, Melbourne Youth Theatre was a significant player, and
that's John Ellis, yeah.
John Ellis was the driving force behind it, but it was that there were two secondary teachers' colleges attached to, at that stage, the only two universities in Melbourne, Monash and Melbourne, and and I was working in one of the Melbourne one, and each of the campuses had been doing their own work with student actors and directors, and the idea was to join the two companies and take each other's work to the other campus. So we that I can't remember how many shows we managed to do, but it was a few years, and some notable people involved. Well, John Wood was a player involved in it, and of course you mentioned John Ellis and Lois Ellis, who were virtually the founders of it, and Ron Danielson. There will be a lot of people won't remember him, but he was quite properly regarded as the top amateur director and acting teacher in Melbourne. I learnt most of whatever I knew at the time from Ron. So there were those two. Elijah Mazinski, since famous and unfortunately recently deceased, but one of the world's great opera directors, who spent, of course, most of his career in London and Europe, and with the Met in New York, doing some wonderful productions. And I was lucky enough to work with Elijah on a couple of projects back in those days through Melbourne Youth Theatre. One of them was a Beckett play, Samuel Beckett's Godot. I did two shows. I did Godot and Endgame, but the one I was trying to think of then was Krapp's Last Tape. That was the play I did with Elijah.
Oh, that was amazing!
And so Elijah, there were a lot of other people involved, but that was a significant. And then that led to after the Pram factory began, and so we're jumping ahead about a decade, I suppose. The church in Abbotsford was a sort of a spin-off from Melbourne Youth Theatre, I would say. But,
yes.
I'm not a historian.
Well, I can fill that in a little for our listeners, or our viewers, actually, because that's also run by John Ellis and Lois Ellis as well. Started out of Deakin University, because John had been teaching at Deakin
University. And
they bought the old church, and John started up the Australian Contemporary Theatre Company in there. Which one of the places that gave us Joanna Murray Smith. But I'm now no longer talking about you, and I should not waste your time. So since we jumped forward to the Pram, I have always been fascinated by, and indeed very nearly once played Monk O'Neill in Stretch of the Imagination, and I know you had a fairly legendary run as Monk O'Neill. Can you tell me anything you remember about creating that role?
Already the original performer was Peter Cummins.
Yes, of
and Jack had directed him. But interestingly and tangentially, I suppose, I remember when Jack Hibbert wrote stretch of the imagination. He brought it, showed it to me and to Peter Cummins as possible to suss out our interest, I guess. And I found it a wonderful read and a tantalising prospect. But at the time I thought, well, this is a role for Peter, and Peter went ahead and did it. And I had a lot of difficulty imagining. Oh, first of all, I want to say that it was a wonderful play to read. It was, and I suspect, and it still shows this. One of the reasons that it is such a good piece for an actor in the theatre is that it was written in a burst over one weekend, I think, and it shows there's no evidence of any rewriting or working over the thing. It's to this day, it's got a spontaneous quality to it. One thing naturally leads to the next thing, and it's a whole, it's a life, it's a piece of poetry, it's a piece of an offering for stagecraft, and it's a satirical view of European Australia, where we were at the time. I think there's a lot in it, and it's a when I say satirical, that to me is an important quality. I think a lot of our best literature and theatre and films over the years, one way or another, has got a satiric quality. I think that's, if there's one quality that defines the Australian point of view in literature, it's the satiric eye. It's got there's a detached quality to it, as at the same time as engagement. There's it's like we've got a third eye somewhere out here, and it's seeing more than we can see somehow, and that's the quality that I call satiric. And Monk O'Neill, the character in Stretch the Imagination, is the ultimate satirist, I guess, apart from anything else. He's a misogynist. He's set himself apart from humanity completely. He lives in a place called One Tree Hill, and his first action when he arrives at One Tree Hill is to chop the tree down, and it goes from there. So he's a misbegotten character. His life's a catastrophe, but he's the cause of the catastrophe. He owns it.
Almost revels in it,
and he lives with it. And I think we all do this. When I say a satiric view, we're talking about a European consciousness in this case, but I think it applies to the first people as well. I think they've got a way of looking certainly at our collective contribution to what's befallen the place is satiric, but I also think they've got there's a comic eye at work across the society, which could be ultimately, if there is a saving grace, it could be our ultimate saving grace. But by the same token, it can be the most destructive thing. It's got a very poisonous quality, which you've got to be. So you're juggling this. Anyway, I wandered off the subject, but I think it's apposite in some way.
Absolutely. And if there's anyone in the country that it's worth listening to talk to about satire, it's you. A lot of my audience are probably fairly young, so they may not remember, but I grew up with the Gillies Report. One of my first memories is Il Dismissal. So I'm more than happy to listen to that. I think the fascinating point, there's two fascinating points you make in there. One about the First Nations people. I would love to see a First Nations performer take on Monk O'Neill. That would be fascinating. And also the way you talk about Monk O'Neill as providing great, providing space for great stagecraft and also that satirical eye reminds me of the Beckett of things like Krapp's Last Tape and Endgame and Godot. So, which I'm sure Jackie would love to hear. And why I bring that back up is because one of the things that was remarkable about watching your performance in I kept calling it solos, mono. Is that at least two of your performances are almost completely without word. It's all physical.
That's right.
And there's so much that you do with your face. There's so much great expression and great comedic value that you can do with just a handful of expressions. And that, I think, you've been a great face actor all your career that I've seen. How much is your conscious brain behind that, and how much is it just I do what the moment takes, how the moment takes me?
It's a fascinating question, and I don't have a a single. I don't have an answer to it. It's a bit of both. When I talk about that satiric eye, the way I've always thought of this is that to make any performance as a character, if you're telling a story by acting it out or showing by doing, if that's what your acting is, that's the way you act, what you act for, then the playing of the character has to be plausible to an audience. They have to recognise it, not intellectually, but they have to feel relaxed, that they understand what you're doing. They have to understand the emotions, the cultural context of the character's behaviour. They have to know it. It has to be plausible, believable in some sense. This is not to say I'm trying to distinguish this from the conventional view of the method, the
Stanislavski,
sort of quasi Stanislavski kind of become the character. It's not to become. You don't become a character, but you have an audience has to believe in some point in the performance in some way. So you have to find that. That's the intuitive part for me of the performance, but you also have to be, I don't know whether you have to be, but I certainly am aware of the effect at the same time. And I've been doing it for a long time, but I don't think it's any more than when I first discovered this at school in front of an audience, the becoming aware, sharing the delight in something you've spontaneously discovered in the course of playing something. It's often something that surprises yourself. It surprises me. I thought once I had to play a character, did a lot of work on parallel bars, and there was a little bit of gymnastics involved. I thought in a million years I'd never be able to do that. I found myself doing stuff that you wouldn't. It was not in any sense proper gymnastics, but it involved weightlessness and physical actions that I was flabbergasted to find myself doing. And that's because the character, the circumstance had somehow taken over. Whatever the character I was playing was doing enabled me to do things that otherwise I wouldn't. So there's an element of spontaneity that helps and maybe is necessary, but at the same time, once you've found yourself able to do it, you remember how you did it, and so you can do it again. Perhaps not so well, but it involves the two things. It involves a degree of spontaneity and intuition, feeling your way into a story, and I think, I believe now at the age of 80, the way that happens in my case is exactly the same as when I was at school doing a play and working out how to fall down stairs, which I did when I was 18. The same process.
Yeah. Well, let's hope you don't have to fall down any stairs anytime soon.
I think I can do it.
Well, let's make sure you're insured first. I know it's your day off, so I am going to let you go. But before I do, I have one question I have to ask, which is of one of Australia's foremost and historically leading satirists. Out of all of the political heads that are out there at the moment, who would you most like to play?
If I was young enough, well, you'd certainly have a go at the Prime Minister. But like to nobody jumps into the frame, but often it was like that in the past. It wasn't. I certainly got a great deal of satisfaction out of playing John Howard, and I played him longer than I have any other character, even though it was, on the face of it, it was not an inspiring prospect for a performer. But the what made this person tick? What made this peculiar political actor tick? That they were always the question. This would be the same now. There's the and just the contradictions between not just aspiration but ideology. Scotty from marketing. Yeah. What is it about this marketer? He can't help himself market the way he does. His connection to truth is now understood widely to be a little tenuous at times. What's behind? These are the fascinating things, as much as the behaviour. We could draw up a list. If you gave me that as homework, I'd come back with a list for you tomorrow.
No, that's amazing, because actually that was more about the process than the individual, and that's even better. I'd love to see you as Scotty from marketing. I think you'd make an amazing teardown of Scotty, and also reveal the kind of broken humanity of him, which is kind of what's so wonderful about your work. Max, I'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time. It's really been an honour to have you here with us today. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Robert.